Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be telling you all about the books that I read in June. Now June was my lowest reading month in terms of quantity, and it was also quite a slumpy reading month for me. I did read 10 books, but 3 of those were children's picture books. And even if you take those out, like reading 7 books in a month is still a lot. It's just not what I would normally read, and I think it was also the mood with which I approached these books. I was in just a massive reading slump because life. This month I was also doing a lot of reading of like articles and stuff online, and I will link some of the most informative stuff that I have read this month down below in the description. I also read a lot more digitally this month than I normally would. But let's just get into these mini reviews of these books, starting with Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. This is a YA romance book that also has a slight sci-fi kind of twist to it. In this book we follow the blossoming and progressing romance between Jack and Kate, who meet at a party. They develop really intense feelings for each other really quickly, and then Kate dies. Jack is then transported back in time and desperately tries to save her, and we see how the relationship between them changes slightly based on what he does differently, but also how what he does differently in order to try save her begins to impact other aspects of his life and his friendships and his family relationships. I thought how quickly these characters fell for each other happened really quickly, and I would have liked a little bit more of a build up to that. It's a really heartfelt novel, and while I don't think it's the most incredible YA book I've ever read, definitely when I was in kind of this really slumpy reading mood, it was just a really nice book to read through and not have to put lots of work into it. Even though there are a lot of difficult moments in it, you know, the girl dies several times. It is still quite like a breezy read, and that was something I really appreciated this month. I also read Date Me Bryson Keller by Kevin Van Wy. This was another YA romance, and it was so swoony, and it is also a male-male romance, so that's really fantastic representation as well. This book is centered around a sort of challenge or a dare that is set for Bryson Keller, who is one of the most popular attractive boys in school. He doesn't really believe in high school or teenage romances. He thinks they're kind of pointless, they're fruitless, and a challenge is set for him to date someone new every single week, and he can't ask anyone, he has to be asked, and it becomes this kind of like sort of viral thing in their school that everyone's kind of gossiping about and focusing on. And at no point when this challenge was set did anyone specify that it had to be girls that asked out Bryson Keller. So when our main character does it, it begins a sort of will they won't they romance, even though we all know they will. I love books that have really balanced depictions of queer experiences, books that show that there are really difficult, challenging, emotional moments, but also books that show the lighter moments, that show people being accepting and embracing of people, and we had a real mix of those things. And overall this was just a really positive, swoony YA romance. It's just so swoony. So swoony. The dynamic between these two characters feels really real, it's really genuine, there's like a proper spark between the two of them. If you want something to hit you right in the feels, this is the book. Another queer book that I read in June was Wonderland by Juno Dawson, and I buddy read this with my friend Aoife. I'm so glad we read this one together. It was just such a great read. I'm such a massive Alice's Adventures in Wonderland fan, and this is like a contemporary retelling of those original Victorian novels. I really enjoyed seeing all the references to the original novels, and a lot of those references are very heavy-handed. It's very obvious who all of the different characters are meant to represent from the original novels. All of the references are like in your face. But because I love that story so much, I really enjoyed that. In this modern retelling, we follow Alice, who is a teenage girl. She's a trans girl. And again, this is a book that shows both the lightness and the dark of a queer experience. It shows the difficult moments, but it also shows some more positive elements. In this book, a character named Bunny, who Alice had a bit of a fling with, who she's kind of friends with, goes missing. And all of the adults around her aren't really concerned about this because Bunny does this all the time. But Alice thinks there's something else going on, and she finds herself at this like massive party called Wonderland, and she is convinced she will find Bunny there. The world of this book is completely unknown to me. It's like super rich teenagers. One of the things I really loved about this book was that it was quite explicit in parts, perhaps more explicit than I would have expected from a YA novel, and that's a good thing. This book is very explicit about sexual experiences, about drug use, about alcohol consumption, which is good. I just will say it's kind of on the older end of YA. One of my pet peeves when it comes to YA books is when you can tell the author doesn't really know their audience, doesn't really know teenagers, doesn't really get them, and that is so not the case with this book. I think Juno Dawson is one of the best young adult writers out there at the moment. Incredible. While we're on books for younger readers, I will go the opposite end and go for the picture books that I read. So I read 3 books by Bethan Wolven. So I read Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, and Little Red, and these are all like fairy tale retellings. I really love Bethan Wolven's art style. I think it's so super cute, and what I really love about her picture books is that they show really empowered young girls, show girls being active. They give a little subtle feminist twist to the original stories. I would really recommend these for young readers, but also if you're like me and you're a grown-up who likes picture books. I also read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This book is everywhere at the moment and it deserves every bit of praise it has been getting. This book follows the lives of 2 twin sisters who run away from their small southern community when they are 16 years old. We follow them into their adult life and their lives have diverged dramatically. One of them is back in the hometown that they once tried to escape, and the other one is living this sort of secret life where she is pretending to be white, and this is a secret that she has to keep buried. And it's so bizarre and fascinating to watch this character, who herself is actually black, is pretending to be white and is really racist. It's a really fascinating look at prejudice within communities. It's a really fascinating look at colorism. It's so superbly written and there are so many phenomenal set pieces in this book and memorable scenes. There's so much to analyse and unpick. The writing is just so pinpoint perfect. This is a book that should be studied in schools and universities. Like, it's so good. It deserves every bit of praise that it's getting, and I am going to leave another full review of this book linked down below in the description that I think does this book much more justice than I'm doing it. This month I also read a short story collection, Hitting a Straight Lick with the Crooked Stick. This is a collection of short stories by Zora Neale Hurston. I had read some of these short stories before because I studied her writing at university, but some of these stories were also new to me and they have been published in this edition for the very first time. Zora Neale Hurston is one of the most talented writers of the Harlem Renaissance, and I think if you want to learn about that period of history, read her short stories. All of her short stories are set in the American South. They have dialect used in the dialogue, which is something that I think a lot of people can find quite tricky, and I think if that's something you might struggle with, I would recommend trying this book on audio. I really get on when there's like regional dialects. I love it. Like, I just love it. So it's one of my absolute favourite things that someone can do with dialogue. And using that really specific dialect really grounds that story in realism and makes the characters feel so genuine. A lot of the short stories in this deal with things like race and gender, the intersection of the two, and a lot of these stories have to do with how people are forced to perform masculinity and forced into like feminine gender roles. I think my favourite short story from Zora Neale Hurston will always be Sweat, which I have now read quite a few times. But if she's a writer that's not on your radar and you like short stories, please read her. Moving on to the 2 non-fiction books I read Motherhood by Sheila Heti. This is a book that I was slightly disappointed by, but I think it's one of those books that you bring a lot of yourself to, and if it speaks to you then it's incredible, and if it doesn't then it's just kind of fine. This is a memoir of sorts about the author's like relationship with herself and her body and her understanding of whether she wants to be a mother or not. It's a book about our perceptions of women's bodies and whether people see value in women's bodies if they don't have a child. There were a lot of elements of this book that really struck me, but there were a few things that slightly bothered me. Like, at one point the author talks about how she envies gay men because people understand why they don't have kids, and I was like, there's just a lot of problems there. It was interesting to read because I haven't really developed my own thoughts about like motherhood and that kind of thing. I do wonder if maybe if I'd read it in a few years when those kind of things are more relevant to my thought processes, maybe it would have impacted me in a stronger way. But I do think if that's something that you're kind of thinking about, give this book a go. I think even if you don't agree with all of it, it would probably give you something to think about. And finally, I read How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This non-fiction book is kind of what it says on the tin. It is a lesson in several lessons, in fact, in how to be anti-racist and why it is not enough to simply be not racist. You have to actively try and combat the societal structures and the internalized prejudice and racist behaviors that you yourself have, and Be Antiracist. I think it's a really important book for people to be reading at the moment. I learned a lot from this book. It's both like really informative and well researched, but it's also grounded in the author's personal experiences, which is something I really appreciate in non-fiction, when it is like really well researched on the topic, but also personal to the author. I also really appreciated how this book touched on intersectionality and how the author himself had failed to be an ally to Black women, for instance, or queer Black people, and what he learned from becoming an ally to those people. If you want to learn more about these kind of topics, which I think everyone would benefit from, I really highly recommend this book. It's a really fantastic resource. So they are all of the books that I read in June. Bit of a weird reading month. I was just very slumpy throughout the entire month, but it's gonna happen, you know, there's a global pandemic. I can go easy on myself. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what your favourite book that you read in June was, or if you've read any of the books that I spoke about, leave me a comment and let me know what you thought of them. I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.